Good afternoon, Raveen and Robert.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Just as we're waiting for everyone to join, I wouldn't mind just understanding for yourselves, are you students or are you in industry? And then just quickly expectations about the event today.
I'm a student, fourth year engineering student at the University of Ottawa. No big expectations, just here to, I guess, learn.
Okay.
I'm a second year student at George Brown College, and same thing, just looking to get some ideas for Capstone and a bit of inspiration.
Okay. Hi, Maha. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I was just asking everyone while we wait for a few more people to join. I think there were about 12 other participants I'm expecting. If you don't mind just telling me a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Actually, I am. I'm not a student. I believe that's a student competition, right?
No, that's fine if you're not a student. So essentially, this is almost kind of part two of a session we held a few weeks ago. So for today was essentially going to kind of walk through in terms of, how do I conduct our capstone project presentations, and then the bulk of it was really more of a question and answer session at the end in case they specific items. And then as well as time dependent, I can touch base on an earlier presentation we'd provided just in terms of the different options in terms of the capstone projects.
Okay, great. Yes, I'm interested in that events, the NEM event.
Okay.
I'm volunteering with Windsor Essex chapter,
Oh, fantastic.
PEO chapter, yes. And I mean, I'm learning a lot. I'm enjoying the different topics and different challenges, and that's my was interesting to watch to see your event.
No, thank you for joining. Hi,
Thank you.
Susanna.
Hello,
Hello.
how are
While
you
we're waiting
today?
for good, while we're waiting for everyone, I was just gonna ask if you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
What would you like to know about me? I'm a
Anything?
licensed
Are you a
engineer.
student? Are you working? Just quick introduction. I know everyone else. We have a few students that are currently in university who've
Okay.
also joined.
I'm a licensed mechanical engineer. I've been working away from engineering for a while,
Okay.
the economic downturn. So I only have a part-time job now at the Canadian Tire store. I worked on small and larger projects, wastewater treatment plant design for the automotive sector and automotive manufacturing
Okay.
plants, and preliminary design of pressure vessels, piping systems. So those are the codes I use, the pressure vessel design and process piping design codes,
Okay.
basically.
Fantastic.
We just hope
Okay.
COVID would go away soon. So
Oh, yes,
hopefully the
right.
economy would get up to speed.
Things will start to change soon. Fingers crossed. We all hope.
Let's hope so. Yes.
Good afternoon, Erin. Welcome. Erin, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, hello. Just wanted a quick introduction of yourself while we're waiting for a few people. I know there were about 50 people registered, but we'll give it another minute or so before we get started.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Are you a student or are you currently in industry?
Oh, I I was currently I was working in industry before, but just because of COVID hit, I'm pretty much out of work, so
Okay,
just coming in to listen in. I worked in
fantastic.
QC for 5 years, so
Awesome. Well, we should use the time to network as well, which is fantastic.
yeah.
Okay, I will give it another minute and we will see how many. I know some, again, as I mentioned, there were 15 people registered, but we'll deep dive into it. Okay, it's 12:05, so I will deep dive into it. I do want us to probably end around 12:50, just so we can give people some time to reconnect back into their regular schedules. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Brenda Menyoku. I'm a chemical engineer by profession. I currently work for Western Foods, based in here in Toronto, but again, they're a North American company. I am the education chair for the PEO Oakville chapter. So a lot of my responsibilities from a PEO perspective are essentially outreach in terms of our student outreach, our memberships, but really focusing on ensuring that we get more of the young people getting into STEM, especially engineering programs. So with that quick intro, we'll jump into what our event today. So what we're hosting was essentially Capstone project presentation. So again, because these people that are in industry, from our last networking session we had on March 6th, which was a networking event, what we also talked about was feedback in terms of how do you receive feedback and how do you give feedback as well, and how to internalize that so you can advance yourself in your career. So what I can do is we'll start off with the Capstone project presentation. So essentially it's what I'm going to cover is two pieces where we'll review how to give a good presentation and then tying it in towards specifically of a Capstone project presentation. But essentially these are all skills that many of us, whether you're working or you're in school, that you'll be able to take away. So I will share my screen, and if everyone can let me know if they can see my screen okay. Can everyone see the screen okay? Okay, so we'll jump into it. So for the first 15 minutes or so, we'll kind of go through tips on presenting a capstone presentation. And then the bulk of this session, I really wanted it to be interactive, whether people have specific questions from, I know we have some students in the session right now, or again, with the industry people with COVID, if there's any questions on tips. I know, we've had many sessions, so hopefully I'll be able to kind of answer some questions on how do you prepare yourself to go back into the workforce given some of the unprecedented times that we're in. So we'll start off with, in terms of the capstone project. So essentially, within the engineering discipline in the fourth year, students have to do a capstone design project. So what that entails, just for a little bit of background, is essentially it's a requirement for completion of their degrees in terms of a challenge. What the purpose of it is we want students to push their own boundaries, apply the knowledge and skills that they've learned in the classroom, and whether they've done co-op work terms as well, and really reinforce the concepts of teamwork, project management, research, and development. It's been a few years since I've been in school as well, but I did do a capstone project, which was on the remediation of oil spills, to remediate the soil. And just going through those concepts of working through the project, again, focusing on what did I learn and how can I apply it, it really added value for me when I ended up getting my first job, which I started off in auto, is because you really need to be able to articulate it the way that you do to a different audience. So we'll kind of talk about how do you present a presentation format, which is not too technical, because as engineers, sometimes we want to get into the technical pieces of the work that we do. But if you're trying to sell a technology or to get buy-in for a project, once you're in the workforce, or essentially even for your capstone designs, your audience may not be technical people. So you really need to be able to articulate what you're trying to say in terms that they will gravitate to the information that you're sharing. So again, for me, it's work in progress, even in my own career right now, is I always laugh that it's death by PowerPoint. And I took this snippet because it's really, we got Herbert here saying, as you can see clearly in slide 397, and you can see the audience is like, oh my gosh, right? PowerPoint poisoning. You don't want to make people get bored and lose insight on what you are about to present. So the less information, the better. It's really about articulating what is it that I want people to take away from the 5 minutes that I have. So in terms of conducting a presentation, I almost think about it in terms of, even in my own career, I've always been coached that you should have an elevator speech. An elevator speech is essentially if you're in the elevator with the CEO or an engineering manager or someone you wanted to get a job from, you have essentially from when you get in the elevator together, from when they get off the elevator, to make an impact that they're going to want to find you. So it's essentially introducing yourself, why you're so great, why they should hire you. It's really finding those little nuggets. And I'm really going to encourage some of you guys to really think about that, especially for those that are out of the workforce because of COVID. It's really, you're going to need to start networking, and essentially doing it via Zoom sometimes is very difficult, but it's about how do I prepare my resume in a 5 minute or less preparation that I can be able to articulate to someone in a short time. So essentially, when you're conducting a presentation, it's essentially the same. For the students, you would have spent a whole year working on a project, and the intent is you will have to either give a presentation to your peers and your professor, and they would grade you. When they're grading you, it's not essentially on the technical work that you have done throughout the course of that presentation. In my earlier slide, I shared that, your professor or your peers will be grading you on, have you applied the knowledge and skills of your presentation? So what did you learn in school, and what did you do to incorporate that into your project? The other aspect that they're going to be looking on are their social skills and not so much the technical skills you would have learned. So if you are working in a team, how did you guys collectively put all your skill sets together in terms of generating that teamwork effort? Project management is another aspect, which is, did you put a plan together? Did you execute against that plan? Were there any risks that happened within that plan that you had to mitigate? It's essentially, they're going to be looking for those elements of how did you essentially plan, execute, and close off your project. And then in terms of research and development as well, this is really whatever you do, you need to be able to do some research in the background, and it has to be relevant. So it's essentially the why did I do this project is also what they will be looking for. So as an example, I mentioned I did a project in my 4th year in university on remediating soil, which is essentially if there was an oil spill, someone had created a testing method to be able to assess whether that oil is ready for us to plant things on again. So my whole project was validating that test. I could have spent slides and slides and on the hours I spent doing all the lab work that I did. But again, when I'm doing that presentation on that format, it's essentially someone developed a testing method. I was going to validate it. I got samples from all over the world in terms of oil spills. I was able to articulate those in terms of assessing whether that soil was ready for to get back whether we're planting agricultural again. And then essentially it's my findings. But what people are going to want to know as well is really what was the point? Why were you doing this, right? So doing your research and development in terms of how can I apply what I did do for my project is also a really, really big key component to when you're doing your capstone design projects. So essentially for me, and I personally use this slides in terms of these 5 tips, even in my day-to-day with work when I have to do presentations for my senior leadership. So in terms of doing a presentation, you really want to kind of highlight 5 points, which translates really to the number of slides as well. So I always try keep presentations under 5 slides. Less content is better because you want people to focus on you and what you're saying versus trying to read or articulate what's actually on a slide. So you always want to shy away from too much information because, again, someone will want to read into it and then that takes away from the message that you're trying to say. So essentially, when you're starting a presentation, you want to focus on what was the current situation. So in the example of a capstone project, it's, this is my 4th year design capstone project, and we were tasked with working on whatever the project name is. Your second slides really needs to introduce what were your solutions and what did you achieve as part of that. So again, if you're working on the soil, my example, which I gave, which is the soil remediation, it's again, I was validating the testing method, which had been done by someone else. And I wanted to make sure that, that method is usable and repeatable with different people doing it. So here you're really building the desirability of why do we need a solution and why do I need to listen to this person who is doing the presentation if you're in the audience. When you get to your slide 3, you want to explain the rationale of your solutions. So why do you believe that this solution works? So again, I validated that this test method for the soil remediation actually worked. So again, it was, why do I believe that this is going to go into industry as a solve? So this is where I had to do my own research, right? In terms of, hey, if I was working in Alberta in the oil spills, or if it was in Dubai or something, oil spills happen, they take away from land. And I've read articles even in Nigeria where a lot of farmers had their lands contaminated with oil. So this is where I had to do that research in terms of how can this test be used in a certain application. So it's essentially really now explaining the rationale of why do you believe that this is a solution that people will want to get into. By the time you explain that rationale, your audience has really bought into your recommendations. They believe that your solutions are there. And then now you want to just close off your presentation with the feasibility of how can we implement it, right? So it's essentially, if I was to go back in the real world, the whole point of a capstone project is to assess how are you going to implement, or how are you going to transition from school into the real world. So part of that is really the feasibility of, could you sell it to a bigger company? Could you start your own company? What problem in the world is it going to solve, right? So these are some of the concepts essentially that you want to think of from a presentation perspective. So I'm going to pause there if there's any questions. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to do, I was going to share a video with you guys, which is off an actual capstone project that was conducted last year by some colleagues and some mentees of mine that I know that actually went to the University of Waterloo. So it's essentially it was a 2-minute presentation that they turned into a video. And you will see as we watch it in those 2 minutes, I just wanted people to kind of see how the relevancy of what they mentioned, right? So it's really, let's see if they focused on what the current situation was, what it is that they developed and how, in terms of the feasibility as well, understanding how they can bring that project over into the world. So I'll start the video, and if you bear with me here, I'm just going to mute myself so I don't have any backlog.
Sorry, I have a question, if you don't mind.
Yes.
I'm really enjoying this presentation. Would it be possible to obtain a recording? Are you recording it, or?
Yes, actually, this is being recorded. And actually, Sarah, I will be able to download it. What I can do is once I download it, I can send out a link to all the people that registered if you'd like.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Okay, so I'm just gonna play.
This design project has been hugely influential in our learning. We get to take the theory we learned in the classroom and some of the practical things we've done on
Sorry
Sorry, I
for
was on
interrupting.
mute.
Okay.
So no, sorry, I was just saying that from what I was able to get from that video was really, what they developed, how it was developed, what it can be used for, the cost in there, and then really the different applications. So, and again, my whole emphasis is really when you're doing that presentation, right? It's short, it's sweet, it hits all the elements where you want to keep making sure that your audience is gravitating towards it. So I do want to open it up just for a quick discussion if there's any specific questions on presentations here. No questions? Okay, then we'll keep going. So again, in terms, I know they are also kind of like the few people. So what I do want to make sure is in the last half hour that I'm really covering content that everyone can take away and make it relevant. So we have two students that we're with, which is Robert and Raveen. I know you guys, Robert, you're in second year, and Raveen, you're fourth year in university. So just open question to the both of you in terms of, is there additional content or any specific questions that you had in regards to either the capstone or how you pick your capstone? I'm not sure, Robert, if you've actually, are you currently undergoing one today?
I haven't started yet, no. So that's more why I was here, just to see what sort of ideas I could get or formulate a plan.
Fantastic. And the reason why I'm asking was in a previous session as well, I would love to share the information where we actually spent a little bit about what are the various types of capstone projects that students can pick. So in that session, I'll cover that really quickly. In that session, we really talked about these really three ways that professors in our Ontario universities really focus on the capstone. Some of them have simulations where they can simulate something within a lab where, again, it's something that you can do with the support of a professor. If they're actually working on their own research, as an example, you could assist them in the research that they're doing. So that's one option. A second option is, again, you can go out and find your own real life experience. So my preference is the latter, which is if you can find industry partners that you can actually work on a project with. An example that I will give is I've been in the food industry for a while, and when I used to work for one of the bakeries where we make Oreos and Chips Ahoy cookies, I did have some co-op students that would support me during the summers. And when they went back to school, they did reach out to say, hey, they essentially had not finished their summer co-op project. So I had to kind of find people within the manufacturing plant to complete them, but they actually offered to come as part of their capstone project to complete the work. So again, that was a win-win for everyone because we as a company got the project completed, which were some great recommendations from the students. And then in turn, they were able to actually get real life experience, which to me is really the importance of these capstone projects. You really want to be able to really utilize your own skills to prepare you for your entry into the workforce. So in terms of conversations, Robert, are you in a co-op program, or you're really just at the beginning of trying to think on which avenue you're going to go to?
I've got a few ideas. I'm just trying to narrow it down and just decide on something at this point.
Yeah, that's perfect. And then again, the advice I will give you is essentially you want to make whatever topic you choose, you want to make sure that it's feasible in the time that you do. So I know with COVID for this year, a lot of the students that I've been talking about, things got shut down last year when they were just starting their projects. So projects that were meant to be conducted as a team now needed to be done individually. So a lot of universities are working through that. But the advice that I've given to some of the students that have reached out to me is that that's exactly the point of the capstone, right? It's simulating real life work. So even detailing, schools got shut down, I couldn't get together with my team, this is what we did to mitigate those risks, is essentially the experience that is intended for these type of projects as well. And then Raveen, any thoughts? I know you're still 2 years plus away from a capstone, but are you interested in a co-op? Or again, I know it's still early phase, but again, as I was saying, part of it, if you are in a co-op program, one of the things you can start to do is build those networks with some of those companies to be able to do a capstone with one of those companies when you do get to that stage.
Yeah, I think Robert's the second year, and I'm the fourth
Oh,
year.
got you.
Um,
Sorry.
but with regards to Capstone, I believe I'll be doing it in the fall, so in this coming September. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to go, if my university will be online or in person, and I guess depending, it will affect how the actual capstone will go. Yeah, I still don't really have any strong ideas of what I'm going to do, and I think it also depends on my group members and trying to find a project that uses all of our skill sets.
Yeah.
So I still have some time. So
No, that's actually, yeah, it's good planning ahead for sure. And then the other piece as well that we did touch on, which I think could be relevant, I know I certainly kind of reflected on it a few back, was before we end our session, was we did touch base on feedback as well. So as you're going through those projects, one of the key elements that's really important to think about is you want to engage, whether it's your team members or whether it's your professors or your sponsors, you want to make sure you're constantly engaging them so that you can get the appropriate feedback. So essentially, it's how you take feedback. A lot of us often perceive that, feedback is a negative thing, but one of the discussions that we did deep dive into was really, feedback is a good thing. You should be using that to articulate how you become better and to leverage how you work through as you progress. So I'll just share some of those key points as well, just with this audience, because it may be relevant information as well. And I'll go. My apologies, I'm just working through this presentation to make sure I get to that part. Okay, so I'm just sharing my screen again. So again, we did talk about, what are the different ways that capstone projects are assigned. So it's either you let students select their own capstone project. Pros to that is that it allows the students to actually pick something that aligns to their skill sets. But my bias on it is that it's easy to game the system because I'm going to pick something that's really easy. But always remember that the capstone is really intended to make you push your boundaries and really test it, right? And an example I'll give, even in industry, when you start working, you're going to be given stuff that you've never worked on before, right? So you want to make sure you're testing how you react to those situations while you're still doing it in your school format. The second way was, students, a professor can assign a student a simulated capstone. So this is the example I gave in terms of sometimes if your professor is working on research, they can just let you help with that. And then the third one is the real world capstone projects where you partner up with a company. And then for me, this is the most valuable approach. And, it does lead into you getting further employment, which makes it a little bit easier once you graduate as well. So these are usually the three options. If you can, I would strongly encourage that you find a real world life capstone project. And you can do that just networking with people that are in industry if they're interested in getting any help. And then we kind of just went through really quickly as well in terms of once you're in that project, what are the key elements? You want to make sure. So again, 4 phases to managing a project, right? And again, this is applicable in any avenue. You have your initiation phase, which is really putting a feasibility study. So what are you solving for? What is your scope? What are your objectives? Who are your team members? Do you need experts to be able to advise you? So you're really asking these questions and then also assessing what are the tools that you need. So I think Robert, as you think about it, right? With the uncertainty of COVID, you really want to make sure that if schools get closed, will I have access if you pick a project that requires lab work, right? Or is this something that I can actually use equipment or tools that I can have at home? So you may just want to kind of plan this initiation phase will be really important for you to just plan out some of those risks as well. And then most importantly, you want to get alignment. You want to make sure that all the people that you're going to need to deliver that project are on board and they know what your expectations are. The second piece is managing a program is your planning phase. So this is essentially building your timeline. So sometimes it's the entire year that they get, but you want to make sure you're asking and aligning with your professors on when the key deliverables are. I think, there's always a checkpoint from the university where you'll do mid-year review, and then there's always the end of the project. So you want to create your timeline, which is your project timeline, which is detailing what are the tasks and deliverables that I need to deliver. And then you also want to do that resource planning. So as you're doing those tasks, do you need additional people to help you, or are they components that your team members are going to be able to do for you? And then you want to make sure that those goals and performance measures in terms of those tasks that they are smart, which is they're specific, they're measurable, which means you know when it starts and you know when it ends. It has to be achievable, it has to be relevant, and you have to set those deadlines for yourself. And then once you build out this timeline is, anticipate the potential risks that could happen and try and put together a contingency plan. I remember when I was in auto, we would, even if we were building a wall that was covering something, we would gather a couple of the engineers in a room and just talk about, hey, what do you think could go wrong? Oh, somebody could close the door and walk into the wall without, just the simplest things that you may not think of, just jot them down because those are very real potential risks that can happen. And then again, as you work through that plan, always make sure that the people that you're going to need help from, that they're aligned to the plan. And then when it comes to executing a project, you really want to make sure this is really where you're now taking that plan and you're working against it. So you're doing your communication management, you're looking at that timeline. If there's costs, you're detailing the costs of everything that you're doing, especially if you're working on a real life situation where you're working with a company and they've probably given you a budget. If you're lucky to have one, then you want to make sure that whatever you're doing is again against that budget and you're tracking it. You want to focus on the quality of the product or the project that you're going to deliver. And then change management. In the example of the co-ops that I used to work with, they actually have cost savings on a manufacturing line, which required us to train the colleagues that worked on that production line differently. So change management is such a huge aspect where if you're asking someone to change the way they do things today, you have to be able to detail how they will actually initiate and execute that change. And then again, making it easy for them. We talked about the risk management as well, just in terms of while you're executing, look at that timeline, just look at all the steps that you need to do and make sure that you're looking at all these components that we've kind of discussed around executing it. And then essentially, again, we're really trying to see if the project's on track, right? Are you meeting what you said you were going to do? And then we talked about this last slide, which was really in terms of closing off that project, which is if it's a capstone project, you're doing your presentation. If you're in a real life work situation, closing a project is not something that organizations do well. I know, like for me, being in the food industry, we hardly take time to pause and think about what we did. So one of the things that I'm actually working on is in my commercialization role is putting a post-launch evaluation process, which is essentially for every project that we deliver for customers, we need to sit down internally and just write down what went well, what didn't go well. And the reason why we have to go through that exercise of closing off those projects is so that we can take those learnings and get better with the next one. And then the third part that I wanted us to kind of just quickly talk about as well is I touched base on that feedback, which is feedback is so important in terms of how am I receiving feedback or giving feedback. And kind of really highlights here for me is that feedback is immediate, regular, and relevant. It's only if I was meeting you for the first time and I'm giving you feedback, you probably wouldn't take that really well because you would be like, okay, I've never had a conversation with you. You don't know a lot about me, but you're giving me feedback about something. So feedback is only really relevant when, someone does it all the time. They make time to talk to you and it's really relevant to the scope of what you're doing. And then from a learning perspective, you have to have time to take that feedback, reflect upon it, and then act upon it. So if you're working through your capstone project and your professor gives you feedback and says you may want to change that, right? You don't have to agree to it right away because that's the essence of feedback. Feedback is about someone telling you something. You have the authority as the person receiving feedback to take it away and think about it, because not all feedback is good. So for me, again, I can say in industry, if you're working, your supervisor could give you feedback, right? Sometimes it's not always the right feedback, but you should always take the time to receive it, reflect on it, which is this relevant or not? So in your capstone project, you may want to ask yourself, okay, that was a great idea that my professor gave me that I can incorporate, but if I add that in, I won't be able to finish my project because it'll add to the timeline. So you really want to reflect on the action that you're willing to take on it, because sometimes you can say, yeah, that was a really great idea. I may need to change that, but I'm not going to do it because I don't have time. And then you can act upon it. And then feedback is also provided as a guide for learning, right? So a lot of us often take feedback, and myself involved. I usually, whenever someone sits me down at work, or I always assume that it's just an assessment at that point in time, but sometimes people genuinely want you to improve. So I think my takeaway is always ask for feedback, and then always kind of reflect on it to see, is it relevant to the situations that you're working on it, and then use that as a learning opportunity, right? Because if the person has the right intentions for you, they're going to give you feedback that actually helps you develop yourself. But again, if the person doesn't have the right intentions, they may be giving you the good feedback, but it may not be applicable at that time. So you really want to make sure that, ask for feedback. It's a good learning opportunity. In fact, there's a TED talk that I have listened to, which said that the people that ask for feedback the most, whether it's negative or positive, one, they prepare for that, because I may come to you and say, hey, Aaron, I need some feedback from you. Tell me, how am I doing? I have to be prepared for him saying not so good things, right? And then the other aspect of it, they say the people that solicit feedback, they use that to make themselves better in situations. And in the workforce, they end up being the people that have the highest return. The people that will end up getting better promotions, they're better with the people in their workforce because they take the time to understand how are they measuring across their peers and how can they make themselves better. So I'll pause there in terms of their feedback session. Any questions? No questions? Any comments? You guys are a very quiet group.
No, that was very informative. Thank you very much.
No, you're very welcome. So it's 12:40. If there's no comments, we still have 5 minutes. If anybody has any questions, any comments, any opportunities to network, feel free to mention it now. Okay, so before I leave, Nem has actually asked me, I'm just gonna send you guys very quick questions. They've asked us to do just a quick poll in terms of some of the activities happening. So I've just launched that. If I can get you guys to just respond to that before we close off this session, please. And then again, I will say thank you guys for the time as well. And again, my contact information and my email, I will send out the video and some of the presentations as well, just so you guys can have that in the background. But we're here to support if you want to be put in communications from our Oakville chapter, just in terms of other networking events, especially for those people that are off work because of COVID. They are a lot of amazing networking career events that also happen. So feel free to reach out anytime. Okay, thank you everyone and have a great afternoon. Okay, bye everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.